I'm Treacy Ziegler. Originally, I'm from Philadelphia, but I'm living in Ithaca, New York now. I had originally been a social worker, and I went to University of Pennsylvania, and I worked as a social worker for a couple years when I was in my 20s, and shortly after went to Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts for 4 years.
At the Rosenfeld Gallery are 2 shows centered around the artist Treacy Ziegler. Moving Through Water, Monoprints, showcases Ziegler's beautiful landscapes and interiors. Art, ALIBI, and An Anonymous We is a show of collaborations between Ziegler and about 50 other artists, some of whom are professionals and some who are prisoners. Most of these convicts are either on death row or in solitary confinement. I asked Treacy about her own work first.
I started out as a painter, but about a year into the academy, I transferred to the printmaking department and started doing monoprints. I have been exhibiting my work for about 25 years. My work is primarily about space, how I move through space and how I experience space. It's landscape and its interiors, and this has been really pretty consistent since when I was at the academy. When I was there, I think I had painted every single corner of the academy.
Treacy won a coveted Shite Traveling Fellowship her last year at the academy and used it to spend time in the American Southwest.
I decided to take the money and go on a road trip across the United States. And at that point, I had done some color, but it was that trip that really got me outside. Obviously, when you're in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, you're really confronted with space in a different way than I was in the museum mezzanine where I did a lot of my paintings. So I started doing landscapes. Landscape becomes a sense of identity. It isn't separate from you. It becomes ontological, that it defines you. In the city, you are defined differently than if you're outside. I do very academic drawings when I do my work. But I take those very detailed drawings and go into my studio and allow them to emerge. And I take what's most essential. One great thing about printmaking and monoprints instead of painting is that you can't be too fastidious, and you have to allow the process to take over. Whatever I might intend about a piece is totally irrelevant because the process is really going to decide. Printmaking is like painting with your elbow. It doesn't allow you to have any details, and I like that. It's like throwing the dice down and then you have to accept what happens. I really love light and shadow. I think that probably has run through all my work. In the case of my monoprints, it's the black plate that I print first. It has the basic armature of the piece, and it really sets up the relationship between the shadow and the light. And then all the plates that I print on top of that are basically empty, and I have to manipulate the ink to create those plates, so there's nothing guiding me. So each time I do it, it has to be somewhat different. It's like making a painting. Each one is different, but it has a basic unity of what it starts from.
There's a beautiful strangeness to Treacy's work that brings to mind Giorgio de Chirico.
I think I've always been compared to de Chirico. Certainly when I was doing the work of Northern Liberties with those factory buildings and the shadows and the green skies. The green skies has always been a key thing. But most recently, I go to Italy every year and do a lot of study of the Renaissance. And so I've been very influenced by Renaissance painting, early Renaissance, before they got too concerned about perspective. I like the fact that they're a little bit off, the skies that are sort of metaphysical in the early Renaissance paintings.
There's a vast distance between the Tuscan countryside and America's supermax prisons. Treacy told me that she first got interested in prisons as a new and different venue for showing her work.
I wanted to find an audience that had no money and no power.
She wrote to a bunch of prisons but was rejected by most. One warden said that not only were his horrible inmates not going to see her art, they weren't even going to see the light of day. But one warden had a background in art and welcomed her. She donated nearly 50 artworks. The inmates had to bid on which ones they'd have in their cell blocks.
They paid a nickel and a dime, whatever money you have in prison. So when I started going to the prison, the men would come up to me and say, every time I turn around, I see one of your paintings. And I wasn't ever sure whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. I sometimes apologized for junking up their prison. I eventually started doing workshops in prisons. The first prisoner I met was a man who got an MFA from Tyler. And he's a very intense man, and he's there for life. And we would have these strong conversations about art, the philosophy. And then I finally said, Fred, will anyone other than your family, your friends, and me see your work outside the context of prison art? And he said, no. And that's why he will never put his art into a prison art show. So I started thinking about what happens when you are an artist in prison. You totally lose your sense of yourself as an artist. And will you ever, ever be recognized again other than a prisoner?
Treacy told me she finds the notion of prison art dehumanizing to the inmates and insulting to art itself.
And so I started to evolve this show where I wanted to present to the viewer art and ask them, can you experience this art as an aesthetic experience, as opposed to, oh,
look at that. This vile beast actually created something of beauty. Maybe it has human feelings.
So I decided that I would have this show where incarcerated artists and non-incarcerated artists would be asked to do a piece of work on a 6-inch circle. And then it would be presented anonymously. I had asked a group of men on death row to do this. I said, I want you to put the audience on trial here. I want you to ask the audience, can you look at this artwork and not think about the fact that I'm on death row? I wanted the pieces to invade the viewer's space, so I decided to hang them from the ceiling with these conduit bars.
The hanging bars and the fact that each piece has both a front and back image gives the installation a claustrophobic feeling. Treacy wrote, I have a network of 2,300 prisoners to whom I write on an ongoing basis. On the frame backs of the circles, I use this prisoner artwork, some of my own artwork, and letters that I received from prisoners. The art on the front side of these pieces was created about half and half by prisoners and non-prisoners, and it's hung anonymously. Some of these front sides, I do recognize who did them. When they're for sale, if it's a very well-known artist like Bo Bartlett, do they sell for more than if they're an artist that's not as well-known?
Our range was $250 to $500. So if you got the Bo Bartlett at $500, you got a deal. And Bo is very, very gracious.
Who do you think was lucky enough to buy the Bo Bartlett one?
Our son. Josh,
really?
From Manhattan, yes. Yep.
Now, how did he know to get it?
My husband called, and he buys art. So now he has my son buying art when we lack the funds.
There's a lot of art here to buy.
There is. A lot of beautiful things. Yeah.
I think your son got a good one.
Yeah, I do too.
I'm so thankful to the artists who participated in this show. All of them, they've been really supportive and enjoyed doing the show. And I gave the artists the opportunity, if they want part of the money, they get part of the money. And if they wanted to donate part to me, that was good too, because every time I sent out a letter to my 2,300 prisoners, it cost me $1,000, and I do that 3 times a year.
Treacy is a remarkable artist and human being. I asked her to share her artistic philosophy that underpins these 2 gorgeous shows.
I think I'm guided by beauty. For me, a painting is successful if it gives the viewer enough space to move around in it, a certain amount of ambiguity, questions get raised, and a sense of beauty.
Check, 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 and check. These shows will be up through the end of March at the Rosenfeld Gallery.